Next up, I'd like to introduce Elizabeth Parisian from Stand Up Chicago.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Parisian. I'm the policy director with Stand Up Chicago and also work for the Workers' Organizing Committee of Chicago. So tonight we're talking about how austerity hurts communities of color. And I wanted to talk a little bit about one specific way in which austerity hurts communities of color, and that's through the violence epidemic that our city is facing. So Stand Up Chicago is a coalition of community, labor, and faith-based groups in the city of Chicago, and we've got dozens of community members, including CTU. And what we found is that our partner organizations, there's a ton of issues that folks are organizing around and care deeply about, from foreclosure to school closings to immigration reform. But what we noticed over the past couple of years is that the overriding concern for most communities is the violence problem that we're facing in Chicago. So Stand Up Chicago set out to do a report that we released a couple months ago, taking a look at the violence epidemic in Chicago and linking that to the poverty that we see in our city. So it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone that Chicago leads the nation in homicides. We also, they say that more Chicagoans have been killed by gunfire in the past 10 years than soldiers have been killed in the Afghanistan war. So our neighborhoods really are war zones. Kids can't go outside to play for fear of stray bullets, and this is happening in the hardest hit, in the poorest communities in the city. So we took a look at decades of research on this subject, and what we found is really quite clear. The strongest predictor of lethal violence, like homicide and gun violence, is poverty and income inequality. And so if you look at Chicago, I think we mentioned it earlier, Chicago leads the nation is third in the nation for metropolitan poverty rates, but it's first in the nation for African American poverty rates. So poverty is something that disproportionately affects communities of color in Chicago. But what we also found is that, so Chicago is a city that's got 18 billionaires and thousands of millionaires and some of the richest zip codes in the country, and yet over a third of our children live below the federal poverty line. And the federal poverty line, as we know, is way, way, way too low. So if we're gonna talk in real terms, most of our children are living in poverty in this city. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that we have a poverty crisis in the city. We have an income inequality crisis in the city as well. They've done some comparisons and found that in terms of income inequality, Chicago is comparable to the Philippines and Russia and Nigeria in terms of equitable distribution of wealth. So we've got a lot of haves and a lot of have-nots in the city, and as we know, that falls along racial lines. You can't talk about poverty in the city and income inequality in the city without talking about race. So the fact is, and folks know this, is that our poorest communities are plagued by violence. And the answer is quite simple. I mean, if you look at, I put this graphic up here so folks can see. This is all the neighborhoods in Chicago, and the circles as they get bigger, that represents the homicide rate. And the colors, as they get darker, that represents the poverty rate. And you can see it almost perfectly correlates. The poorest neighborhoods are the ones with the most gun violence. So we see this, and it should be obvious, and yet when you talk to policymakers, they want to talk about gun control, they want to talk about putting cops on the street, and people that are making decisions about our neighborhoods are not recognizing the fact that if you are going to address gun violence, you have to first and foremost address poverty in our city. We think the answer is simple. You raise wages and poverty goes down. It's been borne out in the research. It shows up in this report. You raise wages for workers and create jobs for the unemployed in our poorest communities, and those communities become safer. So part of the work we do is we work with the Workers' Organizing Committee of Chicago, which is a brand new union of retail and restaurant workers in the Mag Mile and the Loop. And and they deserve a tremendous round of applause. And in fact, one of our workers is here in the audience, Symphony. She is a former Sears worker. She unfortunately got fired after her employers found out that she was a leader with the union, which we know is illegal, but we also know happens all the time. And so she's doing tremendous work in forming this union and getting folks out there. But I wanted to talk just briefly about how austerity fits into this picture, because we're talking about public sector, how austerity measures affect the public sector, but it also affects the private sector too. So when you think about these service jobs, these retail and restaurant jobs, they're the lowest paying jobs. Most folks are earning minimum wage or very close to. Folks are lucky to get 20 hours a week, if that, erratic scheduling, and this is all purposeful. This is not there's nothing inherent about service industry jobs that says it has to be this way. These are purposeful tactics on the part of employers to keep wages low and to keep the workforce very contingent and vulnerable. So we're facing cuts to childcare, for example. If you don't have sick days and you already have an erratic schedule, suddenly you lose your childcare subsidy, you have lost a job. Or that burden of caring for your children falls upon some other woman in your community. So it's gendered too, the way the austerity falls on private sector workers. So I just wanted to really draw our attention to some of this great work that's happening, this great organizing that's happening in the city of Chicago. We've got the Fight for 15 is the Workers Organizing Committee of Chicago's campaign. They're fighting for a minimum wage of $15 an hour for downtown workers. Our studies show that would, for every 25 workers that got raised up to 15, there would be one new job created. And talk about false choices too. There's also this false choice they put out there between job creation and wages, and they'd like to make it seem as though you can't give people a decent wage without losing jobs, and that's simply not true. In fact, the work that the Workers Organizing Committee is doing is one of the best anti-poverty and anti-violence policies that we could get in the city. So I just wanted to make sure folks are aware about this campaign. We can't do it without community support. These workers are tough, they're fighting, but we really need other community groups and other labor groups out there supporting our work. So.